A grieving widower, a desperate Chinese woman, a brother's twisted lie that dragged them both into the Wyoming snow. When Silas Boone opened his door that frozen January morning in 1872, he expected a delivery of leather, not a terrified young woman from Boston who believed she was his bride. But his brother had other plans. Plans Silas knew nothing about. Plans that would force a man dead inside to face something worse than grief, the possibility of living again. Stay with me until the end. Drop a like and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The wind came in mean that morning. Not the kind that whispered through the cottonwoods or rattled the shutters. No, this was the sort of cold that had teeth. It bit through wool, crept under door frames, and settled into bones like it had always lived there. Fort Laramie, Wyoming Territory. January 1872. A place where winter didn't ask permission. It just took what it wanted. Silas Boone stood at the window of his saddle shop, staring out at nothing. The glass was frosted thick, turning the world outside into a blur of white and gray. He didn't bother wiping it clean. What was the point? One stretch of frozen dirt looked the same as another. Behind him, the shop was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock, a wedding gift from 3 years ago that he should have thrown out but hadn't. The workbench sat cluttered with half-finished projects, a bridle that needed stitching, a saddle tree waiting for leather, tools he'd picked up and set down without using. Everything waiting, everything unfinished, just like him. He was 31 years old and felt 60. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and a beard he only trimmed when it got in the way of eating. People in town said he'd been handsome once, back when his eyes weren't so hollow, back when he smiled. That was before Sarah died, before the baby came too early and took her with him on the way out. Before Silas stopped being a husband, a father, a man with a future, and became just an outline of those things, a shadow going through motions. The shop bell rang. Silas didn't turn around. We're closed. Sign says open till 5. The voice belonged to Tom Farley, the stagecoach driver, a wiry man with a face like old boot leather and a habit of talking too much. Sign's wrong. Well, that's unfortunate. Tom stepped inside anyway, stamping snow off his boots. Because I got a situation outside that's got your name on it. Silas finally looked at him. I didn't order anything. Didn't say you did. Tom's expression was strange. Not quite amused, not quite uncomfortable. Somewhere in between. But someone sure seems to think you're expecting company. What are you talking about? Tom jerked his thumb toward the door. Chinese girl, just came in on the Boston stage. Says she's here to marry Silas Boone. The words landed like a fist to the gut. Silas stared at him. What? That's what I said too. Tom scratched his jaw. Checked her papers twice. Got a letter, a train ticket, a photograph, whole 9 yards. All addressed to you. That's impossible. Well, you tell her that. She's been sitting in my coach for the last 20 minutes, freezing half to death, asking where her husband is. Tom paused. You know anything about this? Silas's mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. He hadn't written to anyone, hadn't corresponded with anyone, hadn't so much as thought about another woman since Sarah's funeral. Then it hit him. Danny. Tom raised an eyebrow. Your brother? Silas didn't answer. He was already moving toward the door, shoving past Tom and out into the cold. His breath came in hard clouds as he scanned the street. The stagecoach sat in front of the general store, horses stamping and snorting, their sides steaming in the frozen air. And there, visible through the frosted window of the coach, was a silhouette. Small, still, waiting. Silas crossed the street in long strides, boots crunching through snow that hadn't been cleared since yesterday. When he reached the coach, he yanked the door open. She looked up. The first thing he noticed was that she was young, maybe 22, 23. The second thing was that she was Chinese, which Tom had already told him, but somehow still caught him off guard. The third thing was that she was dressed completely wrong for Wyoming winter. A thin traveling coat, a blue dress that might have been practical in Boston but was suicide out here. No gloves. Her hands were folded in her lap, pale and shaking. But her face was calm, composed, like she was sitting in a parlor instead of a frozen stagecoach in the middle of nowhere. Mr. Boone? Her voice was quiet, accented, but clear. Silas just stared at her. "I am Mei Lian Zhou." She reached into a small bag at her side and pulled out a folded letter. "I received your correspondence in Boston, the ticket, the arrangements. I have come as you asked." He took the letter, unfolded it, saw his own name signed at the bottom, except the handwriting wasn't his. It was Danny's. His jaw clenched so tight his teeth hurt. "This wasn't me." Mei Lian blinked. "I do not understand. I didn't send this. I didn't write to you. I didn't ask you to come here." The words came out harder than he meant them to, and he saw her flinch. But he couldn't stop. "My brother did this, without telling me, without asking." She stared at him, and for the first time he saw the composure crack. Just a little. Just enough. "Your brother?" "Yeah. But the letter. Forged." Silence. The wind howled between them, and somewhere down the street a dog barked. Mei Lian sat frozen, the letter still in her hands, her face going from confusion to something much worse. Understanding. "I see." Her voice was barely a whisper. Silas felt something twist in his chest, but he shoved it down. This wasn't his fault. He didn't ask for this. He didn't ask for any of it. "Where's Danny now?" Tom asked from behind him. "California." Silas didn't take his eyes off Mei Lian. "Left 2 months ago, chasing some gold strike rumor." "Convenient." "Yeah." Tom shifted his weight. "So what do we do with her?" "Good question." Silas looked at Mei Lian again, really looked at her. She was still sitting there, hands folded, face smooth as glass. But he could see the tremor in her fingers, the way she was holding herself together by sheer will. "You got family back in Boston?" he asked. She shook her head. "No family anywhere." "Friends. I came here because there was nothing left for me there." Of course she did. Because Danny wouldn't have picked someone with options. He would have picked someone desperate. Someone who'd have no choice but to come. Silas felt the anger rising again, hot and bitter. Not at her, at Danny, at the whole damn situation. "Can you send her back?" Tom asked. "With what money?" Silas shot back. "You think she's got enough for a return ticket?" Mei Lian spoke up quietly. "I do not." Tom scratched his head. "Well, she can't stay in my coach. And the boarding house won't take her. Mrs. Calloway doesn't rent to—" He stopped himself, but the damage was done. "Doesn't rent to Chinese women." Mei Lian's face didn't change, but Silas saw the way her shoulders stiffened, the way her hands tightened in her lap. "There's a settlement," Tom tried again. "Over in Rock Springs. Chinese railroad workers. She could—" "That's 200 miles, Silas said flatly. "In the middle of winter. You planning to drive her there yourself?" Tom looked away. Silas stood there, snow gathering on his shoulders, staring at this woman who'd crossed an entire continent based on a lie. A woman who now had nowhere to go. No money, no protection, no chance. He should walk away. He should let Tom figure it out. This wasn't his problem. But when he looked at her sitting there, proud and terrified and trying so hard not to show either, something shifted. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was the memory of Sarah telling him once that kindness didn't cost anything. Maybe it was just exhaustion. Or maybe it was the fact that he recognized the look in her eyes. The look of someone who'd already lost everything and was just waiting for the final blow. "Get your things," he said. Mei Lian looked up sharply. "What?" "You can stay at my place, just until we figure this out." Tom's eyebrows shot up. "Silas? Just until the storm passes," Silas cut him off. "Then we'll sort out what happens next." Mei Lian stared at him like she was trying to decide if this was another trick. Another lie. Then, slowly, she reached for a small trunk at her feet. "I can carry it," Silas said. She pulled it closer to herself. "I can manage?" Stubborn, fine. He stepped back and let her climb down from the coach. She was even smaller than he'd thought, barely reaching his shoulder. The wind hit her immediately, and she swayed but didn't fall. Tom looked between them, clearly wanting to say something but smart enough not to. "I'll check back tomorrow," he finally muttered, then climbed back onto the coach and drove off, leaving them standing in the street. Silas nodded toward the saddle shop. It's not far. Mei Lian followed him without a word. The shop was attached to a small house in the back. 2 rooms, a kitchen, a fireplace that Silas only lit when the cold got unbearable. He pushed open the door and gestured for her to go inside. She hesitated at the threshold, looking around like she was cataloging everything. The dust on the furniture, the dishes piled in the basin, the empty whiskey bottle on the table. It's not much, Silas said. It is warm. She stepped inside, setting her trunk down carefully. He moved to the fireplace and started building up the fire. The logs caught quickly, sending light and heat into the room. When he turned around, Mei Lian was still standing in the same spot, hands clasped in front of her. You can sit, he said. She sat. Silence filled the space between them, heavy and awkward. Silas didn't know what to say, didn't know what to do. He'd brought her here on impulse, and now he was stuck with a stranger in his house. A woman. A Chinese woman. In Fort Laramie, Wyoming. This was going to cause talk. Hell, it was already causing talk. He could practically hear the gossip spreading through town like wildfire. Why did he do it? Mei Lian's voice broke through his thoughts. Silas looked at her. What? Your brother. Why did he write those letters? Why did he bring me here? Good question. Silas sat down across from her, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on his shoulders. Danny's always thought he knew what was best for me, always trying to fix things. Fix me. And he thought a wife would fix you? The bluntness of it almost made him laugh. Almost. Yeah, something like that. Mei Lian nodded slowly, like that made sense to her, like she'd dealt with people like Danny before. And you do not wish to be fixed. It wasn't a question. I don't need fixing, Silas said. I'm fine the way I am. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he had the uncomfortable feeling that she saw right through the lie. But she didn't push. She just folded her hands in her lap and stared into the fire. I am sorry, she said quietly. For what? For being here. For being a burden. Silas felt that twist in his chest again. You didn't do anything wrong. I should have been more careful. Should have asked more questions. Should have known. She stopped herself, jaw tight. I was foolish. You were desperate. The words came out before he could stop them. Mei Lian's head snapped up, and for a moment he thought she might argue, but then her shoulders sagged, just a little. Yes, she whispered. I was. They sat in silence after that. The fire crackled, the wind howled outside, and Silas wondered what the hell he'd just gotten himself into. The first night was the hardest. Silas gave Mei Lian the bedroom, the one that used to be his and Sarah's, and took the floor by the fire. She'd protested, but he'd insisted, partly because it was the decent thing to do, partly because he couldn't sleep in that room anyway. Hadn't in 3 years. He lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of someone else in the house. Footsteps. The creak of the bed. The rustle of fabric. It felt wrong. Not because she was Chinese, not because she was a stranger, because she was alive. And Sarah wasn't. Morning came cold and gray. Silas woke to the smell of something cooking, rice maybe, and something else he didn't recognize. He sat up, joints aching from sleeping on the floor, and found Mei Lian in the kitchen. She'd found his meager supplies and somehow turned them into breakfast. A pot of rice. Eggs scrambled with wild onions he'd forgotten he had. Tea that smelled like flowers. I hope you do not mind what, she said when she saw him watching. I could not sleep, so I thought, it's fine. He sat down at the table, and she placed a plate in front of him. The food was simple but good. Better than anything he'd eaten in months. Thank you, he said. She nodded and sat across from him with her own plate. They ate in silence. When they finished, Mei Lian started clearing the dishes, but Silas stopped her. You don't have to do that. I know. She kept clearing anyway, stubborn. He watched her work, efficient and precise, and felt the unfamiliar weight of guilt settling on his shoulders. She didn't belong here. She should be in Boston. Or San Francisco. Somewhere civilized. Somewhere she wouldn't be stared at. Somewhere she'd have a chance. But but she was here. Because of Danny's stupid, misguided plan. And now Silas had to figure out what to do about it. The knock came just after noon. Silas opened the door to find Marshall Garrett standing on the porch, hat in hand, expression uncomfortable. "Silas? Marshall? Got a minute?" Silas stepped outside, closing the door behind him. "What's this about?" Garrett shifted his weight. "Heard you took in that Chinese girl from the stage yesterday." Word traveled fast. "She had nowhere else to go," Silas said evenly. "I understand that, and I'm not here to tell you what to do with your own house." Garrett paused. "But folks are talking. You know how this town is." "Let them talk." "Silas, she's not breaking any laws, neither am I." "I know that." Garrett rubbed his jaw. "But you remember what happened in Rock Springs last year? The riot. 28 Chinese workers killed because people got riled up." Silas's blood went cold. "You saying someone's planning violence?" "I'm saying people are nervous, and when people get nervous, they do stupid things." Garrett met his eyes. "I'm not telling you to kick her out. I'm telling you to be careful." The door opened behind them. Mei Lian stood there, wrapped in a shawl Silas had given her, face calm but eyes sharp. "Marshall," she said quietly, "I do not wish to cause trouble." Garrett looked at her, then at Silas. "Ma'am, it's not about what you wish, it's about, I understand." Her voice was steady. "People fear what they do not know. I'm accustomed to this." Something about the way she said it, so matter-of-fact, so resigned, made Silas's chest tighten. "You shouldn't have to be," he said. She looked at him, surprised. Garrett cleared his throat. "Just, be careful. Both of you." He put his hat back on and left. Silas turned to Mei Lian. "You heard all that?" "I did." "And?" "And I meant what I said. I do not wish to cause you trouble." She pulled the shawl tighter. "If you want me to leave, I will find a way." "Where would you go?" She didn't answer, because there was no answer. Silas felt the anger rising again, not at her, never at her, but at the whole damn situation, at Danny for creating this mess, at the town for being exactly as small-minded as he'd always known it was, at himself for caring when he'd promised himself he wouldn't care about anything ever again. "You're staying," he said. "Mr. Boone." "Silas, and you're staying, at least until spring, until it's safe to travel, until we figure out a real plan." He met her eyes. "Understood?" She studied his face for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Understood." The days that followed fell into a strange rhythm. Mei Lian kept to herself mostly, but her presence changed everything. The house that had been silent for 3 years now had sound. Footsteps. Humming. The rustle of fabric as she sewed or cleaned or cooked. She didn't ask for much, didn't complain, just quietly made herself useful. She mended his shirts, organized the chaos of his kitchen, found vegetables he'd forgotten about, and turned them into meals that actually tasted like something. And Silas didn't know what to do with any of it. He'd gotten used to being alone, used to the silence, used to the emptiness. Now there was someone else in his space, and he couldn't decide if it made things better or worse. Most days, worse, because it reminded him of what he'd lost, of what it felt like to have someone waiting when he came home, of shared meals and quiet evenings, and all the small, ordinary things that made up a life. But sometimes, just sometimes, it felt like breathing after holding his breath for 3 years, and that terrified him more than anything. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The town's curiosity didn't fade, but the outright hostility seemed to settle into a low simmer. People stared when Mei Lian walked to the general store, whispered when she passed, but no one confronted her directly, probably because they knew Silas was watching. He'd made a point of walking with her the first few times, just to make it clear she was under his protection, that anyone who wanted to cause her trouble would have to go through him first. Most folks got the message, but not everyone. It was a cold afternoon in early February when Silas came back from a delivery to find Mei Lian standing in the street, surrounded by 3 boys. Teenagers, really, but big enough to be dangerous. "Go back to China," one of them was saying. "You don't belong here." Mei Lian stood perfectly still, arms at her sides, face blank. "I said go back!" The boy stepped closer. Silas crossed the distance in 4 long strides. "Problem here?" The boys turned, saw him. Their bravado faltered. "We were just leaving," Silas finished for them. "Right now." They left. Mei Lian didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, staring at the ground. "You all right?" Silas asked. "Yes." "They hurt you?" "No." But when she finally looked up, he saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of carrying this every single day. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's go home." She followed him without a word. That night, Silas sat by the fire, whiskey in hand, trying to drown the anger that wouldn't go away. Mei Lian emerged from the bedroom, wrapped in a blanket. "You cannot protect me forever," she said. Silas looked at her. "I can try." "Why?" "Good question. Because it's the right thing to do." "That is not why." She sat down across from him. "You do not care about right and wrong. You care about nothing. Everyone says so." The bluntness of it should have stung. Instead, it just felt true. "Then why do you think I'm doing this, Weitz?" he asked. She was quiet for a long time. "I think," she said slowly, "that you are a man who lost everything. And I think you see someone who might lose everything too, and you cannot stand to watch it happen again." Silas's hand tightened around the glass. "You're wrong." "Am I?" He didn't answer. Mei Lian pulled the blanket tighter. "I had a husband once, in China, an arranged marriage. He was kind. We were content. Then the fever came. He died in 3 days." She stared into the fire. "I came to America to start again, to be someone new. But grief followed me. It always does." Silas felt something crack open in his chest. "I'm sorry," he said. "So am I." She looked at him. "But we are still here, still breathing, still alive. That must mean something." "Does it? I do not know." Her voice was soft. "But I would like to believe it does." They sat in silence after that, 2 people who'd lost everything, trying to figure out if there was anything left worth holding on to. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled on, and inside, something neither of them could name began, very slowly, to shift. February turned into March, and the cold didn't let up. If anything, it got meaner, the kind of late winter spite that made people wonder if spring was just a lie they told themselves to get through. Mei Lian had been in Fort Laramie for 6 weeks, and the routine they had fallen into felt less like a temporary arrangement and more like something permanent. Neither of them acknowledged it. To acknowledge it would mean admitting things neither was ready to say out loud. She woke before dawn every morning, built up the fire, made tea. He came out of his room. He'd taken the bedroom back after the first week when his back couldn't handle the floor anymore, and they ate breakfast in near silence. Then he'd go to the shop, and she'd spend the day doing whatever it was she did, cleaning, mending, reading the same 3 books he had on the shelf over and over. Sometimes she walked to the general store. Mrs. Patterson, the shopkeeper's wife, had warmed to her slightly. Not friendly exactly, but civil. She'd let Mei Lian buy what she needed without too much hostility. Other people weren't so kind. Silas heard the talk. Everyone knew the Chinese girl was living in his house. Everyone had opinions about what that meant. "She cooking for you now?" Old Man Henderson had asked one morning at the livery. "Among other things." "Bet she is." Henderson had laughed, one of those ugly laughs that made Silas want to put his fist through something. But he didn't. He just walked away. Because getting in a fight over what people thought wasn't going to change what they thought. Still, it gnawed at him. The assumption, the implication. Mei Lian never mentioned it. If she heard the gossip, and she had to have heard it, she didn't let on. She just kept her head down and her dignity intact. Which somehow made it worse. One evening in mid-March, Silas came home to find her sitting at the table with a needle and thread, working on something he didn't recognize. "What's that?" he asked, shrugging off his coat. She held up the fabric. "A dress. Simple, practical, made from what looked like old curtains. "I cannot keep wearing the same clothes," she said. "People already talk. I will not give them more reason." Silas frowned. "You don't have to." "I do." She set the dress down. "I cannot keep taking from you without giving something back. You cook, you clean. That's something. That is not enough. It is for me." She looked at him, and there was something in her eyes he couldn't quite read. Frustration, maybe, or sadness, or both. "I need to work," she said quietly. "Real work. I need to earn my keep. There's no, I can sew." She gestured to the dress. "I can sew well, better than most. In Boston, I worked in a shop, made dresses for wealthy women. I know what I am doing." Silas sat down across from her. "Even if that's true, no one here is going to hire you. Then I will work for myself. With what money? What supplies?" Her jaw tightened. "I will find a way." He recognized that look. The same stubborn determination she'd had when she climbed out of Tom's stagecoach that first day. The same refusal to quit even when everything was stacked against her. "All right," he said. She blinked. "All right? You want to sew? Sew. I've got leather scraps in the shop, thread, needles. Take whatever you need. I cannot." "Yes, you can." He stood up. "And if you make something good enough, I'll help you sell it. There's a trading post 3 towns over. They might take it." Mei-Lian stared at him like he'd just offered her the moon. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "Because you're right. You shouldn't have to depend on me forever." He headed toward his room, then stopped. "And because you're going to do it anyway, whether I help or not, might as well make it easier." He didn't see her smile, but he heard the quiet "thank you" that followed him down the hall. That night, lying in bed, Silas wondered when exactly he'd started caring whether she succeeded or not, and why the answer to that question scared him so much. The next morning, Mei-Lian was up even earlier than usual. When Silas came out, she'd already cleared the table and was sorting through a pile of leather scraps he'd brought in from the shop. "You weren't kidding," she said, holding up a piece. "I don't kid. I am learning this about you." She spent the entire day working. Silas tried to focus on his own projects, but he kept finding excuses to check on her. She'd taken over one corner of the shop, laid everything out with the precision of a surgeon, and was cutting patterns with a steady hand. By evening, she had something to show him, a small pouch. Simple but beautifully made, with stitching so fine it looked like it had been done by machine instead of by hand. "This is good," Silas said, turning it over. "It is acceptable." "It's better than acceptable." She took it back from him, frowning at it like she could see every flaw. "It will do." Over the next 2 weeks, she made more. Pouches, belts, a satchel with a reinforced strap, each one better than the last. Silas took them to the trading post like he'd promised. The owner, a gruff man named Carl, looked them over with a skeptical eye. "Who made these?" "Does it matter?" Carl grunted. "If they fall apart, people are going to blame me." "They won't fall apart." Carl examined the stitching, pulled at the seams, tested the leather. Finally, he nodded. "I'll take 6, see how they sell." "Fair enough?" When Silas came back with the money, not much, but something, Mei-Lian stared at the coins in her hand like they were gold. "This is mine?" she asked. "You earned it." She closed her fist around them, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she looked like she might actually believe she had a future here. But Fort Laramie wasn't ready to let her have it that easily. The trouble started small. A woman in the general store refusing to stand near her. A man spitting at her feet as she walked by. Whispered insults that got a little louder each day. Silas did what he could. He walked with her when he could. Made it clear she was under his protection. But he couldn't be everywhere. And Mei-Lian wouldn't let him try. "I am not a child," she said one night when he suggested she stop going into town alone. "I can handle myself." "I know you can, but nothing." Her voice was firm. "I will not hide. I will not let them make me afraid. It's not about fear. It's about being smart." "And what is smart? Staying inside? Letting them win? She shook her head. I have been invisible my whole life, Mr. Boone. In China, I was a daughter no one wanted because I was not a son. In Boston, I was a seamstress no one noticed. I will not be invisible here. Silas didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. But he worried, and his worry proved justified 2 days later. He was in the shop when Tom Farley burst through the door, out of breath. You need to come, now. Silas was on his feet immediately. What happened? It's the girl. Some men cornered her outside the general store. Marshall's there now, but... Silas didn't wait for him to finish. He was out the door and running. He found Mei Lian standing in the middle of the street, surrounded by a small crowd. Marshall Garrett was between her and 3 men Silas recognized, drifters who'd been hanging around town for the past week, looking for work and causing trouble. She called me a liar, one of them was shouting. I want an apology. I said you were mistaken, Mei Lian said evenly. That is not the same thing. You calling me stupid? I am calling you mistaken. The man lunged forward, but Garrett stepped in. That's enough, the marshal said. Silas pushed through the crowd. What the hell is going on? Garrett looked relieved to see him. These men are claiming Miss Joe insulted them. She did, another one spat. Uppity Chinese. Silas's fist connected with the man's jaw before he could finish the sentence. The man went down hard. His friends started forward, but Garrett drew his gun. That's enough, the marshal barked. Silas stood over the man on the ground, breathing hard, fist still clenched. You talk about her like that again, he said quietly, and I'll do worse than knock you down. The man wiped blood from his mouth, glaring, but didn't get up. Garrett holstered his gun and turned to Silas. We need to talk. My office. Now. Silas looked at Mei Lian. Her face was calm, but her hands were shaking. Are you hurt? He asked. No. Go home. I'll be there soon. She nodded and walked away, head high, while the crowd parted around her like she was contagious. Silas followed Garrett to the marshal's office, his knuckles throbbing. The marshal closed the door and turned to face him. You want to tell me what that was about? He had it coming. Maybe. But you just gave this town something to talk about for the next month. Garrett sat down behind his desk. You're making this harder than it needs to be. How should I make it then? Let them harass her? I'm not saying that. I'm saying you need to be careful. People are already watching you, already talking, and now you just punched a man in the street over her. Over her? He was threatening her. I know that, you know that, but that's not what people are going to say. Garrett rubbed his temples. They're going to say you're sweet on her, that there's something going on between you two. There's nothing. I know, Garrett said quietly. But it doesn't matter what's true. It matters what people believe. Silas sank into a chair, the adrenaline draining out of him. So what am I supposed to do? Just let them run her out of town? I'm not saying that either. Garrett leaned back. I'm saying you need to think about what you're doing here, what you're willing to risk, because this isn't going to get easier. Silas stared at the floor. She's got nowhere else to go, he said. I know. And I'm not going to throw her out because some people can't mind their own business. Garrett sighed. Then you'd better be ready for what comes next. Silas left the office with his head pounding and his hand aching. When he got home, Mei Lian was sitting by the fire, still wearing her coat. You should not have hit him, she said without looking up. Probably not. Now they will say things about you, about us. Let them. She finally looked at him. You do not understand. In Boston, there were rumors about me and the shop owner. His wife heard them. She fired me. That is why I had nothing left. Why I answered your brother's letter. Silas sat down across from her. That wasn't your fault. It does not matter whose fault it was. The result was the same. She pulled her coat tighter. I do not want to ruin you the way I was ruined. You're not ruining anything. How can you be sure? Because I don't care what they think. He met her eyes. I stopped caring about a lot of things 3 years ago. What the town thinks of me is pretty far down the list. She was quiet for a long time. Why are you helping me? She asked finally. The truth this time. Silas looked at the fire, trying to find words for something he didn't fully understand himself. When Sarah died, he said slowly, everyone in this town looked at me like I was broken, like I was something to be pitied. And maybe they were right. Maybe I was broken, but I got tired of being looked at like that. So I stopped letting people look at all. He paused. But you don't look at me like I'm broken. You don't look at me like I need fixing. You just look at me like I'm a person, and I guess I wanted to return the favor. Mei Lian's eyes were bright, but she didn't cry. That is the kindest thing anyone has said to me in a very long time, she whispered. Silas didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and stared at the fire. They sat in silence until the logs burned down to embers. The next few weeks were tense. The town hadn't forgotten the fight, and the gossip got worse. Silas ignored it. Mei Lian pretended to, but he could see it wearing on her. The way she moved through the world a little more carefully. The way she stopped humming while she worked. One afternoon in early April, he came home to find her sitting at the table with tears streaming down her face. He froze. In all the weeks she'd been here, he'd never seen her cry. What happened? He asked. She shook her head, unable to speak. He sat down next to her, awkward and uncertain. Did someone hurt you? No. Her voice was choked. It is nothing. I am being foolish. Doesn't look like nothing. She wiped her eyes roughly. I received a letter from a woman I knew in Boston. She told me, she said the shop owner's wife is telling everyone I was his mistress, that I seduced him, that I am... She couldn't finish. Silas felt the anger rise again, hot and vicious. That's a lie. I know it is a lie, she said, her voice breaking. But it does not matter. That is what they believe. And now I cannot even go back if I wanted to. There's nothing left for me there. Nothing left for me anywhere. She put her head in her hands and her shoulders shook. Silas had no idea what to do. He wasn't good at this. Wasn't good at comfort or soft words or any of the things Sarah had been good at. But he couldn't just sit there. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and put his hand on her shoulder. She went still. You're wrong, he said quietly. You have something here. She looked up at him, eyes red. What? A place. Work. A friend? The word felt strange in his mouth. He hadn't had a friend in 3 years, hadn't wanted one. But it was the truth. Mei Lian stared at him, and something in her expression shifted. You consider me a friend? She asked. I guess I do. A small, fragile smile broke through her tears. I consider you a friend as well. They sat there, her tears drying, his hand still on her shoulder, and for the first time, Silas felt something other than grief when he looked at another person. He felt connection, and it terrified him. Spring came grudgingly to Wyoming. The snow melted into mud, and the world turned brown and gray before any hint of green appeared. But slowly, life started to return. Mei Lian's work was selling. Not just at the trading post, but in town. A few women had started asking for custom pieces. Quietly, like they didn't want anyone to know. But they asked. And Mei Lian delivered. She was building something, a reputation, a livelihood, a future. And Silas found himself proud? Was that the word? He wasn't sure. He just knew that watching her succeed felt like watching something good happen in a world that had been nothing but bad for a long time. But with success came visibility, and visibility brought trouble. It was a warm afternoon in late April when Mrs. Calloway, the boarding house owner, showed up at Silas's door. Mr. Boone, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, might I have a word? Silas stepped outside, closing the door behind him. What do you want? I'm here on behalf of several concerned citizens. She clasped her hands in front of her. We've been hearing disturbing reports about the living situation here. What reports? That you have an unmarried Chinese woman living under your roof, unchaperoned. She needed a place to stay. For a few days, perhaps. But it's been months now. Mrs. Calloway's smile was sharp. People are beginning to wonder about the nature of your relationship. People should mind their own business. When it affects the moral character of our community, it becomes everyone's business. She leaned in slightly. There are laws, Mr. Boone, decency laws. And what you're doing, I'm not doing anything illegal. Perhaps not illegal, but certainly improper. Her voice hardened. The town council is meeting next week. We'll be discussing what actions to take. What kind of actions? The kind that protect good Christian people from corrupting influences. Silas felt his jaw tighten. You threatening her? I'm warning you. Get rid of her, or we will. She turned and walked away before he could respond. When Silas went back inside, Mei-Lian was standing in the doorway to the kitchen. She'd heard everything. I will leave, she said. No. Mr. Boone. Silas. And no, you won't leave. They're bluffing. Are they? He didn't answer, because he didn't know. That night they sat up late, trying to figure out what to do. I could go to Rock Springs, Mei-Lian said. Find work with the railroad. That's 200 miles through rough country. I have made it this far. You almost froze to death getting here. But I did not. She looked at him. I am stronger than you think. I know how strong you are. That's not the point. Then what is? Silas stood up, pacing. The point is you shouldn't have to run. You haven't done anything wrong. That does not matter. You know it does not matter. She was right, and he hated it. He sank back into his chair, exhausted. There has to be another way, he said. Mei-Lian was quiet for a long time. Then she said very softly, There is one way. But you will not like it. What? She met his eyes. We could marry. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Silas stared at her. What? If we were married, they could not say anything. It would be legal, proper. That's... He stood up again. That's crazy. Is it? You said yourself I need protection. Marriage would provide that. Marriage is... It's not just a piece of paper. I know what marriage is. Her voice was calm, steady, and I am not asking you to love me. I am asking you to help me survive. Silas felt like the walls were closing in. I can't, he said. Why not? Because, he struggled to find the words, because I was married to Sarah, and I can't just... I am not asking you to replace her, Mei-Lian said quietly. I am asking you to marry me in name only, to protect us both from what the town will do if we do not. She made it sound so simple, so practical, but it wasn't simple. It was asking him to take vows he'd already taken once, to stand in front of people and promise things he wasn't sure he could promise, to let go of Sarah in a way he'd never let go. I need to think, he said. Mei-Lian nodded. Of course. She went to bed, and Silas sat by the fire until dawn, turning the problem over and over in his mind. Marriage. To Mei-Lian. A woman he'd known for 3 months, a woman who was kind and brave and stubborn and strong, a woman who wasn't Sarah, would never be Sarah, but who was becoming something, someone, to him. And that was the part that scared him most, because somewhere along the way, between the arguments and the dinners and the quiet evenings by the fire, he'd started to care. Not just about her safety or her success, about her. And he didn't know what to do with that. 3 days passed, and Silas didn't give Mei-Lian an answer. He couldn't. Every time he opened his mouth to say something, the words died in his throat. She didn't push, just went about her work like she hadn't proposed a marriage of convenience to a man who could barely look at her anymore. But the silence between them grew heavier, more loaded. On the 4th morning, Silas woke to find her already gone. A note on the table said she'd walked to the trading post to deliver some new pieces. Alone. His stomach dropped. He was out the door in seconds, moving fast through the muddy streets. The trading post was 2 miles out of town, and the road was empty this time of morning. Too empty. He found her halfway there. She was sitting on a fallen log, her basket beside her, staring at something in her hands. As he got closer, he saw it was a photograph. Small. Worn at the edges. Mei-Lian. She looked up, quickly tucking the photograph into her pocket. You should not have followed me, she said. You shouldn't have gone alone. I have been alone my entire life. I know how to manage. Silas sat down beside her, breathing hard from the walk. What were you looking at? She hesitated, then slowly pulled the photograph back out, handed it to him. It was a man, Chinese, maybe 30, with kind eyes and a serious expression. Formal clothes, studio lighting. Your husband, Silas said. Yes. He looked at the photo for a long moment, then handed it back. You loved him. I respected him. We were compatible. But love? She shook her head. I do not know if I ever truly loved him. We barely knew each other when we married, and then he was gone. I'm sorry. So am I. She looked at the photograph. But I think I am more sorry that I cannot remember his voice anymore. I try, but it is gone. Like he was never real at all. Silas understood that. He'd forgotten things about Sarah too. Small things at first. The exact shade of her hair in sunlight, the way she hummed when she cooked. Then bigger things. The sound of her laugh. The shape of her handwriting. Forgetting felt like losing her all over again. I keep this to remind myself that I did have someone once, Melian said quietly, that I am capable of being someone's wife, even if I was not very good at it. I'm sure you were fine. I was adequate. She put the photograph away. But I did not make him happy. I tried, but I did not know how. And then he died before I could learn. She stood up, brushing mud from her skirt. That is why your answer does not offend me, she said. I know what I am asking is unfair. To marry someone you do not love, to tie yourself to a woman who brings nothing but trouble. She picked up her basket. I will find another way. Wait! She stopped. Silas stood, his heart pounding. I'll do it. Melian turned slowly. What? I'll marry you. Her eyes widened. You do not have to. I know I don't have to. But you're right. It's the only way to protect you, to protect both of us. He took a breath. So yeah, I'll do it. She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Doubt, maybe. Or regret. You are certain? No, he said honestly. But I'm doing it anyway. A strange expression crossed her face. Not quite relief. Not quite sadness. Something in between. Thank you, she said softly. They walked the rest of the way to the trading post in silence, the weight of what they'd just agreed to settling over them like snow. Marshal Garrett didn't take the news well. You're doing what? He said, leaning back in his chair so hard it creaked. Getting married, Silas repeated. To her. Yes. Garrett rubbed his face and, Silas, think about this. Really think about it. I have. For 3 days? That's not thinking, that's panicking. Maybe, but it's done. The marshal looked at him hard. You know what people are going to say. Let them say it. They're going to say you're marrying her because you've been sleeping with her, that you're making it legal to cover up sin. Silas's jaw tightened. She's been nothing but proper since the day she arrived. I know that. You know that. But the people who want to believe the worst won't care. Garrett sighed. And Mrs. Calloway and her friends? They're going to fight this. How? We're both of age, both unmarried. There's no law against it. There's no law. But there's pressure. And in a town this small, pressure works just as well. Silas stood. Then I guess we'll see who bends first. The wedding was set for the following Saturday, quick and quiet, at the courthouse. No ceremony, no celebration, just signatures and witnesses. Silas told Melian she could back out any time. She said the same to him. Neither did. The days leading up to it were strange. They moved around each other carefully, like strangers again. Melian sewed herself a new dress. Nothing fancy, just clean and presentable. Silas got a shave and a haircut for the first time in months. On Friday night, Tom Farley showed up with a bottle of whiskey. Heard you're getting hitched tomorrow, he said, setting the bottle on the table. Word travels. Always does. Tom poured 2 glasses. You know what you're doing? Not even a little bit, Tom laughed. Well, that's honest, at least. He raised his glass. To bad decisions and the poor bastards who make them. They drank. She's a good woman, Tom said after a while. Tough. Most women would have folded by now. She just keeps going. Yeah, you could do a lot worse. Silas looked at him. This isn't a real marriage, Tom. It's just protection for both of us. Tom snorted. You keep telling yourself that. What's that supposed to mean? Means I've seen the way you look at her when you think no one's watching. Tom poured another drink. And I've seen the way she looks at you. So whatever you think this is, it might end up being something else. Silas didn't know what to say to that, so he just drank. Saturday morning came cold and clear. Silas put on his best shirt, the one Mei Lian had mended so the collar sat right. She wore the dress she'd made, simple blue cotton that somehow made her look both nervous and dignified. They walked to the courthouse together, not touching, not talking. Marshal Garrett was waiting outside with Tom. They'd agreed to serve as witnesses. Last chance to run, Garrett said. Silas looked at Mei Lian. She looked back. We're sure, she said. Inside, the justice of the peace was a tired-looking man named Simmons, who clearly wanted this over with as quickly as possible. He had them stand in front of his desk, opened a worn book, and started reading. Silas barely heard the words, something about commitment and duty and lawful union. The same words probably said at every wedding in every courthouse across the country. Words Sarah had heard once. His chest tightened. Do you, Silas Boone, take this woman? I do. Simmons blinked at the interruption, then continued. Do you, Maylin Joe, take this man? I do. Right then. Simmons closed the book. By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you man and wife. You can. Well, you know. Silas looked at Mei Lian. She looked at him. Neither moved. You're supposed to kiss her, Tom said helpfully. We're fine, Silas said. Mei Lian's cheeks colored slightly, but she didn't argue. They signed the papers. Garrett and Tom signed as witnesses. And just like that, it was done. Silas Boone was married again, to a woman he'd known for 4 months, a woman he didn't love, a woman who didn't love him, a woman who was now legally his wife. Outside, Tom clapped him on the shoulder. Congratulations, I think. Thanks. Garrett pulled Silas aside while Mei Lian talked quietly with Tom. Mrs. Calloway's not going to let this go, the marshal said. You know that, right? Let her try. I'm serious. She's already talking to the town council, saying the marriage is a sham, that you're harboring an immoral woman. We're married now, legally. There's nothing immoral about it. You think the law matters to people like her? Garrett shook his head. Just be careful, both of you. When they got home, and it was strange to think of it as home for both of them now, Mei Lian disappeared into the bedroom without a word. Silas stood in the main room, feeling lost in his own house. What now? They were married, but nothing had actually changed. She still slept in the bedroom. He still took the smaller room. They still ate meals in near silence and moved around each other like polite strangers, except now there was a piece of paper that said they belonged to each other. He poured himself a drink and sat by the fire, trying not to think about the last time he'd been a husband, trying not to compare, trying not to feel like he'd just betrayed Sarah's memory by speaking the same vows to someone else. The bedroom door opened. Mei Lian stood there, still in her blue dress, hands clasped in front of her. Are you all right? She asked. Fine. You do not look fine. He took a drink. I'm adjusting. She came and sat across from him. I know this is difficult for you. It's fine. It is not fine. You loved your first wife. You still love her. And now you are tied to someone you do not even like very much. I like you fine. Do you? Silas looked at her. Really looked at her. At the careful way she held herself. The strength in her shoulders. The intelligence in her eyes. Yeah, he said quietly. I do. She seemed surprised by that. Oh, you're brave and stubborn, and you don't take anyone's nonsense, including mine. He paused. That's worth liking. Mei Lian's expression softened. You are not what I expected either. What did you expect? Someone cruel, someone who would use me and discard me. She looked at her hands. But you have been nothing but kind, even when it cost you. I haven't been that kind. You have, you just do not see it. She stood. I will try to be a good wife to you in whatever way you need. Mei-Lian, not like that, she said quickly. I know what this is, but I can still cook and clean and take care of the house. I can still be a partner in the ways that matter. Silas didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. She went back to the bedroom, and he sat by the fire until the logs burned down. Being married, he decided, was somehow lonelier than being alone. The backlash came faster than expected. On Monday, Silas went to the general store and found Mrs. Patterson wouldn't serve him. I'm sorry, Mr. Boone, she said, not looking sorry at all. But my husband has decided we can't do business with your household anymore. My household. Yes. You mean my wife? Mrs. Patterson's mouth thinned. If that's what you want to call it, that's what the law calls it. The law can call it whatever it wants, doesn't change what it is. Silas left without buying anything. At the saddle shop, 2 customers who'd placed orders came to cancel them. Nothing personal, one of them said. Just don't feel right supporting. Well, you know. Silas knew. By Wednesday, 3 more businesses had refused his trade. By Friday, someone had thrown a rock through the shop window. No note, no explanation, just broken glass and a message clear as day. You're not welcome here anymore. Mei-Lian tried to pretend it didn't bother her, but Silas saw the way she flinched when they walked through town together, the way she kept her eyes down, the way she made herself smaller. We could leave, she said one night. Where would we go? Anywhere. California, Oregon. Somewhere they do not know us. Starting over somewhere else won't change what we are. I know, but it might be easier. Silas thought about it, really thought about it. Packing up, leaving Fort Laramie behind, starting fresh somewhere people didn't know Sarah's name or care about who he'd married. But running felt like losing. No, he said. We're staying. Why? Because I'm tired of letting other people decide what I get to do with my life. He met her eyes. We didn't do anything wrong, and I'm not going to act like we did. Mei-Lian looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. All right, she said. We stay. But staying came with a price. The harassment got worse, more rocks through windows, threats painted on the shop door. Someone killed their chickens and left them in the yard. Marshal Garrett did what he could. But catching vandals in the night was near impossible. You could press charges, he said, if we catch them. Against who? Half the town? Garrett didn't argue. The breaking point came in early June. Silas was working late in the shop when he heard shouting outside. He ran out to find Mei-Lian backed against the wall by Mrs. Calloway and 3 other women. Whore, Mrs. Calloway was saying. You came here to seduce him, to corrupt a grieving man. That is not true, Mei-Lian said, voice shaking but steady. Don't you dare speak to me. You're nothing, less than nothing. That's enough. Silas stepped between them. Mrs. Calloway's eyes blazed. This doesn't concern you. She's my wife. Everything about her concerns me. Wife's, Mrs. Calloway spat the word like poison. You married her to legitimize your sin. Everyone knows it. Everyone's wrong. Are they? Or are you just too blinded by lust to see what she really is? Silas felt his control snap. You want to know what she really is? His voice was low and dangerous. She's the woman who crossed an entire continent based on a lie, who arrived here with nothing and built something anyway, who's endured more cruelty in 4 months than you faced in your entire privileged life. That's what she is. And if that threatens you, that says more about you than it does about her. Mrs. Calloway's face went red. How dare you? No, how dare you? Silas stepped closer. You talk about morality and decency, but you've done nothing but terrorize a woman who's never hurt anyone. So don't you dare stand there and pretend you're better than her. Mrs. Calloway opened her mouth, then closed it. Then, gathering her skirts, she turned and stalked away, the other women following. Silas turned to Mei-Lian. She was pressed against the wall, breathing hard, eyes wide. Did they hurt you? He asked. She shook her head. Come on, let's go inside. But she didn't move, just stared at him. "What?" he said. "You defended me." "Of course I did." "No one has ever—" She stopped, started again. "No one has ever defended me before." Something in her voice broke something in him. "Well, get used to it," he said roughly, "because I'm not stopping." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and before he could think about it, he pulled her into his arms. She went stiff for a moment, then collapsed against him, sobbing into his chest. He held her, awkward and uncertain, one hand hovering over her back before finally settling there. "It's all right," he said quietly. "I've got you." And standing there in the street with his wife crying in his arms, Silas realized something that terrified him. He meant it. He had her, and somewhere along the way, she'd gotten him too. That night, they sat up late talking. Really talking, for the first time since the wedding. "I do not understand them," Mei-Lian said. "Why they hate me so much?" "They're afraid." "Of what?" "Of change, of difference, of anything that reminds them the world is bigger than this town." Silas poured her tea. "And they're angry because you survived, because you showed up with nothing and refused to disappear like they wanted you to. So I am being punished for surviving." "Yeah." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That is the story of my life." "Tell me," Silas said. "Tell you what?" "Your story. The real one, not just the pieces I've picked up." Mei-Lian looked at him for a long moment, then started talking. She told him about growing up in China as the fourth daughter in a family that wanted sons, about being sold into a marriage she didn't choose to a man she didn't know, about the fever that took him and the scandal that followed when his family blamed her for bringing bad luck. She told him about the ship to America, the cramped quarters, the sickness, the fear, about arriving in Boston and finding work in a dress shop, about the owner who was kind until his wife decided Mei-Lian was a threat, about the rumors and the firing and the desperation that made Danny's fake letters seem like salvation. "I knew it was too good to be true," she said quietly, "but I wanted to believe it anyway. I wanted to believe someone wanted me." Silas felt his chest tighten. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For Danny. For all of it." "You did not cause any of it." "No, but I didn't make it easier." She smiled slightly. "You saved my life. I would say that counts as making it easier." "I didn't save anything. I just gave you a roof." "You gave me more than that." She looked at him. "You gave me dignity. You gave me a choice. You married me when you did not have to, just to protect me. That is not nothing." Silas didn't know what to say to that. "Your turn," Mei-Lian said. "My turn what?" "Tell me your story, the real one." He started to refuse, then stopped, because maybe it was time. So he told her about Sarah, about meeting her at a dance when he was 23 and falling for her quiet strength, about the wedding, the joy, the plans they'd made, about the pregnancy, the excitement, the fear when she went into labor too early, about the baby, a boy, who lived for 10 minutes, and Sarah who bled out before the doctor could stop it, about the guilt that ate at him, the belief that he'd failed them both, the conviction that loving anyone again would be betraying their memory. "I thought grief was something you carried until you died," he said. "I thought that was what love meant, hurting forever." "And now?" Mei-Lian asked softly. Silas looked at her, at this woman who'd become his wife without either of them planning it, who'd somehow worked her way into his life until he couldn't imagine it without her. "Now I don't know," he admitted. "I'm still figuring it out." They sat in silence after that, the weight of their stories hanging between them. Finally, Mei-Lian stood. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me. Thank you for asking." She went to bed and Silas sat by the fire, thinking about the strange path that had brought them here. Two broken people, two impossible histories, one unlikely marriage, and something growing between them that neither knew how to name. The next morning, Silas woke to find Mei-Lian already up and dressed. "I need to tell you something," she said. His stomach dropped. "What?" "I think—" She took a breath. I think I am starting to care for you, more than a wife of convenience should. The words hit him like a fist. Mei Lian, I know this is not part of our arrangement. I know you married me for protection, not affection, but I cannot help what I feel. She met his eyes. And I thought you should know, so you can decide what to do about it. Silas stared at her, his heart pounding, because the truth was, he'd been feeling the same thing. Had been for weeks, maybe longer. The way his chest tightened when she smiled. The way he looked for her when he came home. The way her absence made rooms feel empty. It wasn't the same as what he'd felt for Sarah. That had been young love. Uncomplicated. Easy. This was different. Harder. Built on shared pain and mutual survival and 1,000 small moments of understanding. But it was real, and it terrified him. I don't know what to do with that, he said honestly. I know. She nodded. But I needed you to know anyway. She left for the shop, and Silas stood alone in the kitchen, feeling the ground shift beneath his feet. Because caring for Mei Lian, really caring for her, meant letting go of Sarah. And he didn't know if he was ready for that. Silas spent the day in a fog, his hands working on autopilot while his mind spun in circles. He stitched leather he'd have to redo later, measured twice and cut wrong, knocked over a jar of rivets that scattered across the floor like thrown dice. Tom stopped by around noon and took one look at him. You all right? Fine. You look like hell. Thanks. Tom leaned against the workbench. Trouble with the wife? Silas's hand stilled. She's not. We're not. You're married, aren't you? On paper. Paper's all the law cares about. Tom picked up one of the scattered rivets, rolling it between his fingers. So what's eating you? Silas set down his tools. She told me she's starting to have feelings for me. Tom's eyebrows went up. And that's a problem because that's not what this was supposed to be. What was it supposed to be? Protection. A legal arrangement. Not, Silas gestured helplessly. Not real. Tom laughed. You've been living together for 4 months, eating meals together, fighting the whole town together. You got married, for crying out loud. What part of that isn't real? It's not the same as what? As Sarah? Tom's voice softened. Silas, nothing's ever going to be the same as Sarah? That was a different life, a different you. But that doesn't mean this can't be something good. I don't know if I can do it again. Do what? Be happy? Care about someone? Live? Tom shook his head. Brother, you've been dead for 3 years. This woman shows up and suddenly you're fighting and arguing and actually giving a damn about something other than your next drink. If that's not living, I don't know what is. Silas wanted to argue, but he couldn't, because Tom was right. Before Mei Lian, he'd been going through motions, working enough to eat, eating enough to work, existing in the space between alive and dead without being either. Now he was angry, scared, confused, protective, worried. He was feeling things again, and maybe that was the real problem. Not that he might care about Mei Lian, but that he already did. When he got home that evening, Mei Lian was cooking. The smell of ginger and garlic filled the small house, and for a moment, Silas just stood in the doorway, watching her work. She moved with efficient grace, her hands quick and sure. She'd changed out of her good dress into something simpler, had her hair pulled back with a ribbon he'd bought her last month at the trading post. She was humming something low and melodic, a song he didn't recognize. She looked at home, like she belonged here, like this was her kitchen, her house, her life. And maybe it was. They were married after all, even if neither of them knew quite what that meant yet. You can stop lurking in the doorway, she said without turning around. How'd you know I was here? You are not as quiet as you think. She glanced over her shoulder. Are you going to stand there all night? Or are you going to wash up for dinner? Bossy. Practical. But there was a small smile on her face. They ate in silence. Not the awkward silence of the early days, but something more comfortable, companionable, almost. Finally, Silas set down his fork. I've been thinking about what you said this morning. Mei Lian's hands stilled. And? And I don't know what to do with it. I don't know if I can be what you need. I am not asking you to be anything. Yeah, you are. Maybe not out loud, but he struggled for words. If you have feelings, that comes with expectations, even if you don't mean it to. She was quiet for a moment. You are right. I am sorry. I should not have said anything. No, I'm glad you did. He ran a hand through his hair. I loved Sarah. I loved her so much it nearly killed me when she died. And I don't know if I can survive loving someone like that again. Then do not love me like that. He looked at her, surprised. Love me differently, she said. Or do not love me at all, but do not punish us both for something that has not happened yet. What if I hurt you? What if I hurt you? She met his eyes. This fear goes both ways, Silas. I have lost people too. I know what it costs. Then why risk it? Because the alternative is being alone. And I am tired of being alone. Her voice was soft but steady. I do not need you to love me. I do not need you to make me promises you cannot keep. But I need you to stop treating me like I am made of glass. Like caring about me is something dangerous. It is dangerous. Everything is dangerous. Breathing is dangerous. Living is dangerous. She stood, started clearing the dishes. But we do it anyway. Silas sat there, watching her move around the kitchen, and felt something shift in his chest. She was right. He'd been so afraid of losing again that he'd refused to have anything worth losing. But Mei Lian was already here, already part of his life, already someone he cared about, whether he wanted to or not. The only question was whether he was brave enough to admit it. The answer came from an unexpected place 2 days later. Silas was in the shop when the door opened and a man he'd never seen before walked in. Well-dressed, clean-shaven, city clothes. Help you? Silas asked. I'm looking for Mei Lian Zhou. The man's voice was cultured, Eastern accent. I was told she lives here. Every muscle in Silas's body tensed. Who's asking? My name is William Chen. I'm an attorney from San Francisco. I represent a client who has an interest in Miss Zhou's situation. Mrs. Boone, Silas corrected. And what kind of interest? Chen pulled out a card, handed it over. My client is part of a benevolent association that helps Chinese immigrants in difficult circumstances. We've heard about Mrs. Boone's situation here and would like to offer assistance. What kind of assistance? Relocation to San Francisco, housing, employment opportunities, a chance to start over in a community where she wouldn't face the same hostility. Chen looked around the shabby shop. Surely you can see she deserves better than this. Silas felt cold. She's my wife. A marriage of convenience, from what I understand, entered into under duress to protect her from harassment. Chen's smile was professional. No one would blame either of you for acknowledging the arrangement has served its purpose. We can help facilitate a quiet dissolution and give Mrs. Boone a real future. Get out. Mr. Boone, I said get out. Silas moved toward him. My wife isn't interested in your help. Perhaps she should be the one to decide that. I'm deciding for both of us. Now leave before I throw you out. Chen held up his hands. Very well, but I'll be at the hotel until tomorrow if she changes her mind, or if you do. He headed for the door, then paused. You seem like a decent man, Mr. Boone. Don't you want what's best for her? The question haunted Silas long after Chen left, because the truth was, he didn't know what was best for Mei Lian. San Francisco would give her things he couldn't: community, safety, a life without constant fear and harassment. All he could offer was a small house in a hostile town and a broken man who didn't know how to love anymore. Was keeping her here selfish? Was he holding her back from something better? That night he told her about Chen's visit. She listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. So, Silas said when he finished, what do you want to do? What do you think I should do? That's not an answer. Neither is your question. She set down her sewing. You are asking me to choose. I'm asking what you want. No, you are asking me to tell you that I want to stay so you do not have to ask me yourself. Her eyes met his. You are afraid, so you're giving me an escape, letting me be the one who decides to leave so you do not have to feel like you drove me away. Silas felt like he'd been punched. That's not, it is exactly what you are doing. She stood. You have been doing it since the day I arrived, keeping me at arm's length, treating this marriage like a temporary arrangement, refusing to let me in because it is safer to push me away than to risk caring. I do care. Then prove it. Her voice cracked. Tell me to stay. Tell me you want me here. Tell me this is real to you and not just a duty you're performing out of guilt. I don't know how. Then learn. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I am not Sarah. I will never be Sarah. But I am here. I am real. And I am tired of begging you to see me. She turned and went into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Silas stood frozen, her words echoing in his head. She was right, about all of it. He'd been so busy protecting himself from future pain that he'd been causing pain right now, to both of them. He crossed to the bedroom door, knocked. Go away, Mei-Lian said, her voice thick with tears. No. Silas, I'm coming in. He opened the door. She was sitting on the bed, face in her hands, shoulders shaking. Silas sat down beside her. You're right, he said quietly. I've been a coward. She didn't look up. I've been treating you like you're temporary because if I admit you're permanent, I have to admit I could lose you. And I don't know if I could survive that again. He took a shaky breath. But you're also right that I'm hurting you now by being too afraid of future hurt. And that's not fair to you. Mei-Lian finally looked at him, eyes red. I don't want you to go to San Francisco, Silas said. I want you to stay, here, with me. Why? Because... He struggled for words. Because when you're not here, the house feels empty. Because your cooking is the only thing I actually taste anymore. Because you're stubborn and brave, and you don't let me wallow in my own misery. He met her eyes. Because somewhere along the way, you became my wife, not on paper, for real, and I don't want to lose that. A tear rolled down her cheek. Do you love me? The question hung between them. Silas thought about Sarah, about the young, easy love they'd had, about the promises he'd made to her that he'd thought were forever. Then he thought about Mei-Lian, about the hard-won trust between them, about the way she'd fought her way into his life and refused to leave even when he'd given her every reason to. It wasn't the same as what he'd felt for Sarah, but it was real. I don't know, he said honestly, but I think I could. If you let me. If you're patient with me while I figure out how. Mei-Lian searched his face for a long moment. That is enough, she whispered. For now, that is enough. She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her while she cried, holding her while he figured out what it meant to be a husband again, holding her because letting go felt impossible. The next morning, William Chen knocked on their door. Silas answered. She's not interested. I'd like to hear that from her, if you don't mind. Mei-Lian appeared behind Silas. He is telling the truth. I am staying. Chen looked between them. Are you certain? The offer is generous. A real chance at a better life. I have a life here, Mei-Lian said firmly, with my husband. Chen's expression shifted to something almost sad. Then I wish you both the best of luck. You'll need it. He left, and Mei-Lian closed the door. You're sure? Silas asked. Are you? I asked first. She smiled slightly. I am sure this is my home now, for better or worse. That's from the wedding vows. I know. She took his hand. I meant them, did you? Silas looked at their joined hands, hers small and scarred from sewing, his large and rough from leather work. Yeah, he said. I did. They stood there in the doorway, holding hands like awkward teenagers, and Silas felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. But hope, he was about to learn, came with a price. 2 weeks later, Mei-Lian told him she was pregnant. She said it quietly over breakfast, like she was commenting on the weather. Silas's fork clattered to his plate. What? I am pregnant. About 2 months, I think. His mind went blank. Then it flooded with memories. Sarah, round with child. Sarah bleeding. Sarah dying. Silas? Malian's voice seemed far away. Are you all right? He stood up so fast his chair fell over. I need air. Silas? But he was already out the door. He walked. Didn't know where he was going, didn't care, just needed to move, needed to breathe, needed to outrun the panic clawing at his chest. Pregnant. Malian was pregnant, which meant in 7 months he could lose everything all over again. He ended up at Sarah's grave. He hadn't been here in over a year, couldn't stand it. But now he sank down in front of the simple headstone and let his head fall into his hands. I can't do this again, he said to the silence. I can't watch someone I care about die. I can't bury another child. I can't. He broke off, throat tight. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm sorry I'm moving on. I'm sorry I married someone else. I'm sorry I'm starting to love her. The words stuck in his throat, but he felt the truth of them anyway. He was falling in love with Mei Lian, and now she was carrying his child, and all he could see was blood and death and loss. What do I do? He asked Sarah's grave. How do I survive if I lose her too? The wind whispered through the grass, but offered no answers. He sat there until the sun started to set, then finally forced himself to go home. Mei Lian was sitting by the fire, sewing. She looked up when he came in, her expression carefully neutral. Are you all right? She asked. No. She set down her sewing. Do you want to talk about it? Sarah died in childbirth. The words came out flat. The baby came early, lived 10 minutes. She bled out before the doctor could stop it. I watched them both die and couldn't do anything. Mei Lian's face went pale. I did not know. Now you do. He sat down across from her. And now you know why I'm terrified. I am terrified too. He looked at her, surprised. You think I am not scared? She said softly. I have heard the stories. I know what childbirth can do. I know the risks. She put a hand over her still flat stomach. But I'm also here, alive, pregnant, and I need to believe I will survive this. What if you don't? What if I do? Mei Lian, what if everything goes right, Silas? What if the baby comes healthy and I survive and we get to be a family? What if all your fear is for nothing? But what if it's not? She reached across and took his hand. Then we face it together. You do not have to carry this alone. Silas looked at their joined hands, felt the warmth of her skin against his. I don't know if I'm strong enough, he admitted. You are. I have seen your strength. I know what you are capable of. She squeezed his hand. But you have to choose. Fear or hope, running or staying. Which one will it be? Silas closed his eyes. He could run, could pull away, could protect himself from potential loss by refusing to let himself care. Or he could stay, could face the fear, could choose to hope even though hope had betrayed him before. He opened his eyes and looked at Mei Lian, at this woman who'd crossed an ocean on a lie and stayed anyway, who'd faced cruelty and hatred and kept going, who was carrying his child and asking him to be brave enough to believe in a future. Stay, he said. I'm choosing to stay. Relief flooded her face. You are certain? No, but I'm doing it anyway. She smiled through tears. That is all I ask. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. And for the first time since Sarah died, Silas let himself imagine a future that didn't end in grief. The pregnancy progressed slowly. Mei Lian was sick most mornings, exhausted by afternoon, but she kept working, kept sewing, kept building the life she'd carved out for herself. Silas watched her like a hawk. Every wince made his heart stop. Every complaint sent him running for the doctor. You have to calm down, Dr. Morrison told him after the third unnecessary visit. She's healthy. The baby's healthy. You're the only one who's falling apart. I just want to make sure I know what you want, but you can't protect her from every possibility. Childbirth has risks. So does living. So does loving someone. The old doctor fixed him with a stern look. You either trust she's strong enough to survive this, or you drive yourself mad trying to prevent the unpredictable. Silas tried to take the advice, tried to relax. He mostly failed, but Mei Lian was patient with him. When he woke up in the middle of the night to check she was breathing, she didn't complain. When he insisted she rest more than she needed, she humored him. When his fear made him short-tempered and difficult, she weathered it with grace. "I know you are scared," she said one night, "but I am not Sarah. My body is not her body. This baby is not that baby. What happened before does not have to happen again. I know." "Do you, or are you just saying that?" He was quiet for a moment. "I'm trying to believe it. That is enough." She took his hand, placed it on her growing belly. "Feel that? That is life. Our life. Happening right now. Do not miss it because you're too busy being afraid." Under his palm, he felt a flutter. Faint but unmistakable. The baby, moving, real, alive. His throat tightened. "I felt it." "I know." Mei Lian smiled. "Say hello to your child." Silas kept his hand there, feeling the small movements, and let himself believe just for a moment that everything might actually be okay. As Mei Lian's belly grew, something else grew with it. Their marriage. It stopped being something they talked around and became something they lived. They shared meals and conversations and the small intimacies of domestic life. They argued about money and chores and whether to name the baby before or after it was born. They laughed at stupid things and supported each other through hard days. They became partners, and somewhere in all of it, Silas fell in love. Not the way he'd loved Sarah, young and uncomplicated and full of easy promises. This was harder, more deliberate, built on choice as much as feeling. He loved the way Mei Lian hummed while she cooked, the way she refused to back down from an argument even when he was being an ass, the way she looked at him sometimes like he was someone worth looking at. He loved her strength, her stubbornness, her refusal to be anything other than exactly who she was. He loved her. And one night in late November, with winter closing in again and her belly round with their child, he finally told her. "I love you," he said, simple, no preamble. Mei Lian looked up from her sewing, eyes wide. "What?" "I love you. I should have said it sooner, should have been braver, but I'm saying it now." He crossed to where she sat, knelt in front of her. "I love you, Mei Lian, not because I have to, not out of duty, because I want to. Because you're the best thing that's happened to me in 3 years and I'm done pretending otherwise." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Say something," he said, suddenly nervous. "I love you too." She cupped his face in her hands. "I have loved you for months. I was just waiting for you to catch up." He laughed, then kissed her, soft and careful, and full of all the words he didn't know how to say. When they pulled apart, she was smiling. "About time," she said. "Yeah," he agreed. "About time." They sat together by the fire, her hand in his, their child moving between them, and Silas finally understood what it meant to be alive again. December came with snow that didn't quit. It piled up against the house in drifts taller than a man, turned the streets into white tunnels, buried Fort Laramie under a silence so complete you could hear your own heartbeat. Mei Lian was 8 months along now, moving slow and careful, one hand always on her back. Silas watched her like she might disappear if he blinked. Every twinge, every grimace, every sharp intake of breath sent his heart into his throat. "You're going to give yourself a heart condition," she told him one morning, catching him staring. "I'm fine." "You are not fine. You barely sleep. You follow me around like a worried dog." She lowered herself into a chair with a grunt. "I am pregnant, not dying." "I know that. Do you?" He didn't answer because they both knew the truth. He was terrified, had been since the moment she told him. Every day that passed brought them closer to the birth, and every day his fear grew sharper. But he was trying to be present instead of paralyzed, trying to trust instead of catastrophize, trying to believe that this time would be different. Some days he almost succeeded. The town had settled into an uneasy truce with them. Most people still wouldn't do business directly, but they'd stop the outright harassment, probably because Mei Lian was visibly pregnant now, and even the hardest hearts had limits when it came to a woman carrying a child. Or maybe they'd just gotten tired of fighting. Either way, the silence was better than the hostility. Silas took what he could get. On a particularly cold afternoon 2 weeks before the new year, Dr. Morrison stopped by to check on Mei Lian. He examined her thoroughly, asked questions, listened to the baby's heartbeat through his stethoscope. "Everything looks good," he said finally. "Baby's in the right position, strong heartbeat. You're healthy. No reason to think there will be complications." "But there could be," Silas said. Morrison gave him a long look. "There's always risk, Silas. Always has been. Always will be. But this isn't Sarah's pregnancy. Different woman, different baby, different circumstances. That doesn't guarantee, nothing guarantees anything. That's life." The doctor packed up his bag. "But I'll tell you what I see. I see a strong woman with a healthy pregnancy. I see a baby who's growing right on schedule. And I see a husband who needs to stop borrowing trouble from the future." After he left, Mei Lian was quiet for a long time. "Do you believe him?" she asked finally. "I want to." "That is not what I asked." Silas sat down beside her. "I'm trying to. Every day I'm trying." She took his hand. "That is all I ask. Just keep trying." The contractions started on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks into the new year. Silas was in the shop when Mei Lian appeared in the doorway, face pale, one hand on her belly. "It is time," she said. Everything went cold. "You're sure?" "I am sure." He dropped everything, ran to get Dr. Morrison, ran back, set up the bedroom the way the doctor had instructed weeks ago. Boiled water, gathered clean linens, moved through the tasks mechanically while his mind screamed, "This is how it starts. This is how I lose her." "Silas?" Mei Lian's voice cut through his panic. She was sitting on the bed, breathing through a contraction. "I need you here, with me, not lost in your head." He crossed to her, took her hand. "I'm here." "Are you?" He forced himself to focus. To see her, not his memories. To be present for this moment instead of drowning in the last one. "I'm here," he said again. "I'm not going anywhere." She squeezed his hand as another contraction hit. "Doctor." Morrison arrived 20 minutes later. He examined Mei Lian, nodded to himself. "Still early," he said. "Could be hours yet. Maybe all day." "Hours?" Silas felt sick. First babies take their time, especially with... He paused. "Well, point is, we're in for a wait." The hours crawled by. Mei Lian labored through the morning and into the afternoon, her contractions getting stronger, closer together. Silas stayed by her side, holding her hand, wiping her face with a cool cloth, trying to remember how to breathe. She was so strong. Even in pain, even exhausted, she never complained. Just worked through each contraction with grim determination, resting between them, gathering strength for the next wave. "You are crushing my hand," she said at one point. Silas loosened his grip. "Sorry. It is all right. Just save some bones for after." She was joking. Even now she was joking. He loved her so much it hurt. Evening came. Then night. The contractions got worse. Mei Lian's strength started to flag. "I cannot," she gasped after a particularly brutal one. "I cannot do this." "Yes, you can," Silas said fiercely. "You're the strongest person I know. You can do this." "What if something goes wrong?" "Nothing's going wrong. Morrison says everything's normal. You're doing everything right." He brushed sweat-soaked hair from her forehead. "You just have to keep going. I am scared." "I know, me too." He kissed her forehead. "But we're doing this together. You and me. Just like everything else." She nodded, then another contraction hit, and she cried out. Silas felt helpless. Useless. All he could do was hold her hand and watch her suffer and try not to fall apart. Morrison checked her again around midnight. "Almost there," he said. "What, though?" He said. "Another hour, maybe 2. You're doing great, Mrs. Boone." But an hour passed, then 2, then 3. Mei Lian was fading. Silas could see it. The way her grip on his hand had weakened, the way she barely had the energy to scream anymore. "Something's wrong," Silas said. Nothing's wrong, Xia, Morrison said. She's just tired. It happens. Sarah got tired too. Right before, this isn't Sarah. Morrison's voice was sharp. And if you fall apart now, you're no good to anyone, so get it together. Silas clenched his jaw, nodded. Then Malian screamed. Not a contraction scream, something different, something worse. Morrison moved fast. The baby's crowning. Next contraction, you push. Everything you've got. Understand? Malian nodded weakly. The contraction came. She pushed. Nothing happened. Again, Morrison said. She pushed again, sobbing with effort, trembling, breaking. Silas felt his own tears fall. Come on, love, you can do this. Just a little more. I cannot. Yes, you can. One more. Just one more. The next contraction hit. Malian screamed and pushed, and Silas held her hand and prayed to anything that would listen that this time would be different. And then he heard it. A cry. Small. Angry. Alive. Morrison lifted the baby, moved quickly, cleared its airway. The crying got louder. It's a girl, the doctor said. Healthy girl. Silas couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only stare at this tiny red-faced creature wailing in Morrison's hands. A girl. Their daughter. Alive. Silas? Malian's voice was weak. Is she all right? She's perfect, Morrison said. 10 fingers, 10 toes, lungs like a locomotive. He cleaned the baby quickly, wrapped her in a blanket, placed her in Malian's arms. Malian looked down at their daughter, and the expression on her face made Silas's chest crack open. Wonder. Exhaustion. Love so fierce it was almost frightening. Hello, little one, she whispered. The baby stopped crying, opened dark eyes, looked at her mother like she recognized her. Silas moved closer, careful, like they might both disappear if he moved too fast. Can I? He asked. Malian nodded. He reached out, touched one tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled around his, grip surprisingly strong. And something in Silas broke. All the fear, all the grief, all the walls he'd built to keep from feeling this much. They crumbled. He put his head down on the bed and wept. For Sarah and the son he'd lost. For the years he'd spent dead inside. For the terror of the last 9 months. And for the impossible gift of this moment. This child. This life. Malian put her free hand on his head, fingers gentle in his hair. We did it, she whispered. He looked up at her. At this woman who'd crossed an ocean on a lie and stayed anyway. Who'd fought her way into his life and refused to leave. Who'd just given him the one thing he thought he'd never have again. A family. Yeah, he said, voice rough. We did. Morrison finished up the rest, making sure Malian was stable, checking the baby again, giving instructions for the next few days. You both did good, he said. Real good. Get some rest now. You've earned it. After he left, Silas and Malian lay together in the bed, their daughter between them, neither willing to sleep yet. What should we name her? Malian asked. They'd talked about names before, but never settled on anything, too afraid to choose, too afraid to make it real. I was thinking, Silas hesitated. Sarah May, if that's all right with you. Malian looked at him, surprised. After your first wife? It. After both of you, the 2 strongest women I've ever known. He touched the baby's head. She should have a name that means something, that honors where she comes from. Malian's eyes filled with tears. You would do that? Name her after Sarah? She was part of my life, part of who I am, and I don't want to forget that. He met Malian's gaze. But you're my life now, you and this little girl, and I want her to know both parts of her story. Sarah May? Malian said softly, testing the name. It is beautiful. Yay, Silas agreed. It is. They fell asleep like that, exhausted, relieved, whole. The first weeks with a newborn were brutal. Sarah May cried constantly, wanted to eat every hour, refused to sleep for more than 20 minutes at a time. Between the two of them, Silas and Mei Lian were lucky to get 3 hours of sleep a night, but Silas had never been happier. Every sleepless night was proof his daughter was alive. Every cry meant she had strong lungs. Every feeding meant she was growing. He'd take exhaustion over loss any day. Mei Lian recovered slowly, too slowly for Silas's peace of mind. She was pale, weak, clearly in pain, though she tried to hide it. "You need to rest more," he told her. "I am resting." "You're feeding her every hour." "She is hungry every hour. What would you have me do?" "Let me help." "You cannot feed her." "I can hold her, change her, walk with her when she cries." He took the baby from her arms. "You don't have to do everything alone." Mei Lian looked at him with something like wonder. "My first husband never held our child, said it was women's work." "Your first husband was an idiot." She laughed. Actually laughed. The sound filled the small house like light. "Yes," she agreed. He was. As January turned to February, something shifted in Fort Laramie. Maybe it was the baby. Maybe it was the fact that Silas and Mei Lian had clearly made a life together despite everything. Maybe people just got tired of being cruel. Whatever it was, the hostility started to thaw. Mrs. Patterson stopped Silas in the street one day. "Heard you had a daughter," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She hesitated, then pulled a small package from her bag. "I made these. For the baby. Nothing fancy, just some booties and a blanket." Silas stared at the package like it might explode. "You didn't have to." "I know I didn't have to. I wanted to." She looked uncomfortable. I wasn't kind to your wife, to you, and I'm not saying I understand everything, but a baby's a baby, and every child deserves something soft." She pressed the package into his hands and walked away before he could respond. When he got home and showed Mei Lian, she cried. "People can change," she said, holding the tiny booties. "Not everyone, not always, but sometimes." "Yeah," Silas said. "Sometimes." More gifts followed. A basket of food from the woman who ran the boarding house, firewood from a neighbor who'd previously crossed the street to avoid them, small gestures, tentative olive branches. Not everyone came around. Mrs. Calloway and her circle still glared whenever they saw Mei Lian, still made comments just loud enough to be heard. But the town wasn't a unified wall of hate anymore. It was just a town, with good people and bad people, and most people somewhere in between. And that was something. One evening in late February, Tom stopped by with news. "Letter came for you today," he said, handing over an envelope. "From California." Silas's stomach dropped. He recognized the handwriting, Danny. He opened it with shaking hands. The letter was short. Danny had heard about the marriage, about the baby, wanted to apologize for the mess he'd caused, said he'd been stupid and selfish and hadn't thought about the consequences, said he hoped Silas had forgiven him. Silas read it twice, then handed it to Mei Lian. She read it quietly, then set it down. "What will you tell him?" she asked. Silas thought about it, about his brother's betrayal, about the chaos it had caused, about the months of hell that had followed. But he also thought about Mei Lian, about Sarah May, about the family he had now because of Danny's stupid, misguided plan. "I'll tell him he's an idiot," Silas said, "and that he owes Mei Lian the biggest apology of his life. And that I'll probably forgive him eventually, but he's got a lot of groveling to do first." Mei Lian smiled. "That seems fair." "What about you? Can you forgive him?" She was quiet for a long moment. "He brought me here on a lie," she said finally. "He used my desperation against me. He hurt us both. But without his lie, I would never have met you, never had Sarah May, never found a home." She looked at the letter. "So yes, eventually, I can forgive him." Silas pulled her close, careful of the baby sleeping between them. "You're a better person than I am," he said. "No, I am just tired of carrying anger. It is too heavy." She leaned into him. "I would rather carry love." Spring came slowly to Wyoming that year, like it always did. The snow melted into mud, the mud dried into dirt, and eventually, reluctantly, green things started to grow. Sarah May was 3 months old, starting to smile, starting to notice the world around her. She had Mei Lian's dark hair and Silas's eyes, and when she laughed, the sound could light up the darkest room. Silas had never known he could love something this much, this fierce, this consuming. Every time he looked at his daughter, he thought about the son he'd lost, about Sarah, about the life that had ended before this one could begin, and he felt grateful. Not for the loss, he'd never be grateful for that, but for the fact that loss hadn't been the end of his story. One afternoon in early May, he found Mei Lian in the small garden she'd started behind the house. Sarah May was in a basket beside her, watching clouds. "What are you planting?" Silas asked. "Vegetables, herbs, some flowers." She patted the dirt around a seedling. "Things that will grow." He sat down beside her, took her dirt-covered hand. "You know I love you, right?" he said. She looked at him, surprised by the sudden declaration. "I know. I don't say it enough. I should say it more." He squeezed her hand. "You saved my life. You know that? You saved mine first." "No, I just gave you a roof. You did the rest." He looked at their daughter, sleeping peacefully in the spring sunshine. "You came here with nothing and built everything. A business, a home, a family. You did that." Mei Lian's eyes glistened. "We did that. Together." "Yeah," he agreed. "Together." They sat in the dirt, holding hands, watching their daughter sleep, and Silas thought about how strange life was. 3 years ago, he'd been a dead man walking, buried alive in grief and guilt, convinced his life was over. Then a woman arrived in the snow, wrong place, wrong time based on a lie, and everything changed. Not easily, not smoothly, not without pain and fear and 100 reasons to give up. But she'd stayed, and he'd let her. And together they'd built something neither of them could have built alone. A partnership, a marriage, a family, a future. That evening, after Sarah May was asleep and the house was quiet, Silas pulled out a piece of paper and started writing. A letter to Danny. He told his brother about the baby, about how she'd screamed her way into the world with Mei Lian's stubbornness and his lungs, about how she was 3 months old now and already had both of them wrapped around her tiny fingers. He told him about the town, how some people had come around, how others never would, how he and Mei Lian had stopped caring either way. He told him about falling in love, about how it wasn't the same as the first time, how it was harder and slower and built on choice instead of chance, but how it was real. Maybe more real because of the hardship it took to get there. And then he told Danny the truth he'd been avoiding. "Thank you for being an idiot, for writing those letters, for bringing Mei Lian here. Because yeah, it had been a disaster. Yeah, it had caused pain. Yeah, Danny had been selfish and thoughtless and deserved every bit of anger Silas had thrown his way. But it had also given Silas his life back. Not the life he'd had before. That was gone. Sarah was gone. The son he'd never known was gone. But this life, the one with Mei Lian and Sarah May and a future he could actually see, this life was worth having. And he wouldn't have it without Danny's interference. So yeah, thank you. You're still an idiot. But thank you. He signed it, sealed it, and set it aside to mail tomorrow. Then he went to bed, where Mei Lian was already sleeping, Sarah May in a cradle beside her. He looked at them, his wife and his daughter, and felt something he'd thought he'd lost forever. Peace, not the absence of pain. He still hurt sometimes, still missed Sarah, still woke up in cold sweats thinking about childbirth and blood and loss. But the pain didn't run his life anymore. He'd learned to carry it alongside the joy, to let both exist at the same time, to live with grief without letting grief be all he lived for. He climbed into bed beside Mei Lian. She stirred, moved closer, draped an arm across his chest. "Love you," she mumbled, half asleep. "Love you too," he said, and meant it. 5 years later, Silas Boone stood in front of his saddle shop, expanded now, twice the size it had been, and watched his daughter chase chickens around the yard. Sarah May was 5 years old, wild-haired and stubborn, with her mother's determination and her father's inability to quit. Behind her, her younger brother, 3-year-old Daniel, named after the uncle who'd accidentally brought their family together, toddled after her on chubby legs. Inside the shop, Mei Lian worked at her sewing station, A full corner of the space now with proper lighting and storage and a sign that said Joe and Boone Fine Leatherwork. Her business had grown. Not huge, but steady. Enough that she employed 2 other women now. Enough that people came from 3 towns over to buy her work. Enough that no one questioned her place in Fort Laramie anymore. She was Mrs. Boone, mother, business owner, member of the community, not because she'd bowed to their expectations, but because she'd refused to. Papa! Sarah May ran up to him, chicken feather in her hand. Look what I found. That's something, Silas said, crouching down. You steal that from the chicken? She gave it to me. Did she now? Yes, we made a deal. Silas laughed. What kind of deal? I stopped chasing her. She gives me a feather. Smart chicken. Daniel toddled over, wanted to be picked up. Silas lifted him, settled him on his hip. Mama says dinner soon, the boy said. Then we better go wash up. They went inside together. The shop smelled like leather and machine oil, and the ginger tea Mei Lian always kept brewing. The walls were covered with tools and samples and a few photographs. One of Mei Lian and Silas on their wedding day, looking awkward and uncertain. One of Sarah May as a newborn. One of the whole family, taken just last year. Mei Lian looked up from her work, smiled. Good timing. Food is ready. They ate together at the big table Silas had built last winter. Simple food. Good conversation. The easy chaos of family. After dinner, Silas helped Mei Lian clean up while the kids played. Tom stopped by today, she said. Said there's a Chinese family coming through next month from the railroad, looking for a place to settle. What did you tell him? That they should come here, that it is not perfect, but it is possible. She dried a plate. Was that all right? More than all right. He kissed her temple. This town could use more families like ours. She leaned into him. Like ours. I like that. Yeah? Yeah. They stood there in the kitchen, watching their children play, and Silas thought about the journey that had brought them here. The lies. The grief. The fear. The courage it took to stay when running would have been easier. The choice to build something new instead of mourning what was lost forever. The slow, hard work of learning to love again. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't been smooth. There'd been setbacks and struggles and days when it felt impossible, but they'd done it anyway. And now here they were, 5 years later, still standing, still fighting, still loving, still alive. That night, after the kids were in bed, Silas and Mei Lian sat on the porch, watching the stars come out. Do you ever think about Boston? He asked. Sometimes, she said, but not the way I used to. What way do you think about it now? Like a dream I had once. Not bad, not good, just something that happened to someone else. She looked at him. This is my life now, here, with you, with them. No regrets? About leaving Boston? No. She paused. About answering your brother's letter? Sometimes, but only because of the pain it caused at first. And now? Now I am grateful. She took his hand, because that letter brought me to you, and you brought me to this, to home. Silas pulled her close, breathed in the scent of her hair. I'm grateful too, he said quietly, for all of it, even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts, Mei Lian corrected. They made us who we are. Yeah, he agreed. They did. They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and made the best of it. 2 people who'd learned that love wasn't just feeling, it was choice, decision. The daily act of showing up and trying again. 2 people who'd survived loss and grief and cruelty and fear and come out the other side not unscathed, but whole. Different than they'd been, scarred and stronger and more real, but whole. Inside, one of the kids cried out in their sleep. Mei Lian started to get up, but Silas stopped her. I'll go, he said. He went inside, found Sarah May sitting up in bed, eyes wide. Bad dream? He asked. She nodded. He sat beside her, pulled her into his arms. Want to talk about it? There was a monster, she said, and it was chasing me. Did it catch you? No, Mama fought it off. Silas smiled. It sounds like your mama. Papa? Yeah? Are monsters real? He thought about how to answer that. About the real monsters he'd faced. Grief, hatred, fear. About the ones Mei Lian had faced. Prejudice, cruelty, exile. Some are, he said finally. But you know what's also real? What? People who fight them. People who refuse to let the monsters win. He kissed the top of her head. People like your mama, and you, and me. Sarah May thought about that. We're monster fighters? She asked. The best kind, he said. The kind that fight with love. She seemed satisfied with that. Lay back down, let him tuck her in. Papa? Yeah, sweetheart? I love you. His throat tightened. I love you too, more than anything. He sat with her until she fell back asleep, then went back outside. Mei Lian was still on the porch, waiting. Everything all right? She asked. Everything's perfect, he said. And for the first time in his life, he actually meant it. Because perfect didn't mean easy, didn't mean painless, didn't mean without struggle or fear or doubt. Perfect meant real. Messy. Human. Perfect meant a family built from ruins. A love earned through hardship. A life that honored the past without being imprisoned by it. Perfect meant sitting on a porch in Wyoming with a woman who'd crossed an ocean on a lie and stayed for the truth. With children sleeping inside who'd never know a world where their parents weren't fighters. With a future stretching out ahead of them, uncertain, challenging, but theirs to shape. That was perfect, not despite the imperfections, because of them. Silas Boone had spent 3 years dead, buried in grief and guilt and the conviction that his life was over. Then a woman arrived in the snow and everything changed. Not easily, not quickly, not without pain, but completely. She taught him that surviving loss didn't mean forgetting it, that loving again didn't betray the first love, that grief and joy could coexist, that you could honor the dead while still living for the living. She taught him that second chances weren't about replacing what was lost. They were about building something new from what remained. And Mei Lian, she'd learned something too. That she wasn't a mistake, wasn't unwanted, wasn't less than human just because the world said so. She was strong, capable, worthy of love and respect and a place to belong. She'd crossed an ocean believing a lie, but she'd stayed for the truth that she deserved better than what she'd been given, the truth that she could build a life with her own hands, the truth that love, real love, wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing someone every day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Together, they'd taken the wreckage of their separate lives and built something that worked. Not a fairy tale, not a romance novel, just a real marriage between real people who'd faced real pain and decided to face the future together anyway. And if that wasn't worth celebrating, Silas didn't know what was. As the stars wheeled overhead and the Wyoming wind whispered through the grass, Silas Boone sat with his wife on their porch, thinking about the strange and winding road that had brought them here. About Danny's stupid letter. About a Chinese woman on a stagecoach. About a frozen morning when he'd made one hard choice that changed everything. About all the moments since, big and small, painful and joyful, that had led to this one. And he realized something. He wouldn't change any of it. Not the grief, not the fear, not the struggle. Because without all of that, he wouldn't have this. This house. This family. This life. This woman beside him who'd seen him at his worst and loved him anyway. This future stretching out ahead of them, uncertain but full of possibility. What are you thinking about? Mei Lian asked quietly. How lucky I am, Silas said. She laughed softly. Lucky? We have survived riots and harassment and nearly died in childbirth. That is your definition of lucky. Yeah, he said. It is. Because I have you. And that makes everything else worth it. She leaned her head on his shoulder. You are sentimental tonight. Must be getting old. You are 36. Exactly. Ancient. She laughed again, and the sound filled him with warmth. They sat like that until the cold drove them inside, where their children slept and their life waited. A life built on ruins and lies and impossible choices. A life that shouldn't have worked but did. A life that proved, against all odds, that second chances were real. That love could grow in frozen ground. That two broken people could make each other whole. And as Silas Boone closed the door on the Wyoming night and turned to face his family, he finally understood what it meant to be alive again. Not just surviving, not just existing. Living. Really living. And it all started with one impossible arrival in the snow. With a grieving man and a desperate woman and a choice that changed everything. A choice to stay. To try. To build something from nothing. A choice that saved them both.